The fog lay heavy across the valley that morning, curling like smoke around the old train trestle outside Maple Ridge. If you'd been walking there, you might have thought nothing unusual was waiting in the mist. Just the quiet hum of October, the faint smell of pine needles pressed into damp soil, and the faraway scent of chimney smoke drifting down from the mountains. But Officer Caleb Hart knew better than to trust stillness. Years on the force had taught him that silence often hid the loudest tragedies. That was why he always lingered near the tracks during his patrol. The spot had a way of carrying sound differently, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Caleb was 36, tall and steady, a man carved by experience. His storm-gray eyes swept the area with patient precision. He had left the chaos of Harrisburg's city force 3 years earlier, trading flashing sirens for Maple Ridge's quiet rhythm. Out here, surrounded by forest and fog, he had hoped to stitch back together the parts of himself that the city had worn thin. He paused at the center of the bridge, resting his weight on the damp timbers, listening to the steady trickle of the Lehigh River below. That's when it happened. A sound. Not the echo of water, not the rustle of leaves, not a bird calling through the fog. This was different, faint, broken, trembling. A whimper. Caleb froze. The sound drifted up again, muffled and urgent, like it was clawing its way through the steel. His pulse jumped. He tilted his head, shutting out the forest's stillness until only that one fragile note remained. Pain. He knew it instantly. Without hesitation, Caleb moved, boots crunching the wet, gravel as he followed the noise. He cut down the slope, grabbing thorny branches and slick stones to keep balance. The fog pressed close, wrapping him in its damp shroud. Then, through the haze, he saw them, and for one terrible heartbeat, he nearly stopped breathing. 4 German shepherds, 1 grown, 3 barely old enough to leave their mother. All of them tied, blindfolded, and stuffed into rough burlap sacks. Twine bit into their legs and crossed over their eyes. They lay huddled against the steel rails, trembling, violently from fear or cold or both. The adult, clearly the mother, raised her head as Caleb approached. Her ears strained forward, one broken and bent at the tip, her sable and copper coat patchy with scars and bruises. She gave a low growl, but it wasn't the sound of aggression. It was the sound of a creature cornered, terrified, yet still pushing. Her muzzle toward her pups as if to shield them from harm. The puppies were heartbreakingly small, no more than 8 or 9 weeks. One wore a dark mask across his face, while the other 2 were frail and trembling, pressing desperately into their mother's side. Caleb's jaw tightened. The ground beneath him thrummed, the rails had begun to hum. He looked up, a headlight pierced through the trees. The curve of the track bent it out of full view, but the deep roar that followed made his chest tighten. A freight train. Fast. Caleb's instincts surged to the surface. He dropped to one knee and yanked his utility knife free from his belt. His voice came low and steady, the voice he'd used to calm victims at their breaking point. "Easy, girl. You're not alone." He cut quickly, starting with the smallest pup. The twine loosened, and the pup whimpered in relief. Then the second, then the third. Deep grooves were left in their fur where the ropes had bitten down. The train horn wailed, long, loud, merciless. Caleb's heart kicked harder. No time. He turned to the mother, slicing through the knots at her legs, then slipped an arm beneath her chest. She tensed, but instead of fighting, she leaned into his strength, trusting him. The pups clung close, as if their fragile world depended on her heartbeat. With one sweeping motion, Caleb lifted the mother into his arms, heavy but breathing, and called sharply to the puppies, "Come on, let's go!" Somehow they obeyed. He scrambled up the embankment, boots sliding on gravel slick with fog. His breath tore in his throat as the roar behind him grew into a monstrous scream of steel on steel. Wind lashed at his back as the train bore down. He hurled himself across the last timber, his spine rattling from the vibration of iron. And then, impact. The freight train exploded past them, shaking the earth. Sparks shot from the rails. Heat and grit blasted into the air. Caleb threw himself into the frozen grass, wrapping his body around the dogs, shielding them from the storm of noise. The puppies burrowed into his legs, K, the name forming in, his mind, as if it had always belonged to her. Pressed her muzzle against his arm. Then, as suddenly as it came, it was gone. Silence. Caleb raised his head slowly, chest heaving. His hands shook. The mother dog turned, touched her nose to his palm, and gave a soft lick. A thank you spoken in a language beyond words. "Yeah," Caleb whispered, voice rough. "You're safe now." A rustle made him look up. Across the road, near a leaning mailbox, a figure stood watching. Mara Duval. A widow in her late 60s, shoulders broad from years of gardening, gray hair wound into a loose bun, silver-rimmed glasses glinting through the fog. She wore a patchwork coat and rubber boots splattered with mud. She had lived nearby for decades. Caleb had fixed her fence 2 months back. She wasn't the type to speak unless she had to, and now she said nothing. She just looked. Behind her, at the tree line, a rust-colored pickup idled. Caleb blinked. He'd never seen that truck in town before. The moment he turned back, it was gone. Mara stepped closer, carrying a folded wool blanket. "You'll want this," she said simply. Caleb nodded, wrapping the shivering pups. Ka laid her head against his thigh, eyes tired but steady. Mara's voice was soft, certain. "Someone meant to erase them." Caleb didn't answer, but he felt it in his bones. This wasn't random cruelty. This was deliberate, cold, and someone had almost gotten away with it. By the time Caleb pulled his cruiser into the gravel drive of his cabin, the fog still hadn't lifted. The mist clung to the evergreens like ghosts, the air colder now, heavy with unspoken weight. He opened the passenger door carefully. Inside, curled on the blanket, the 4 German shepherds barely stirred. The pups whimpered softly, Ka's ribs pressing against their tiny bodies as she sheltered them. Her fur was matted and scarred, fresh wounds layered over old. And yet, her eyes never left him. Not fearful, just tired. Caleb scooped up the smallest, pup, one with a pale stripe down his nose, and tucked him gently into his coat. "I've got you," he whispered. He led them inside his cabin, a place simple and unadorned. Pinewood floors, faded curtains, an old fireplace stacked with kindling, a couch worn from years, and a framed photo of a younger Caleb in uniform. Arms around fellow officers who were now just shadows in his memory. He laid quilts near the fire, spread blankets, and eased the dogs down one by one. Then he reached for his phone. "Elise," he said when the line picked up. "It's Caleb. I've got a situation. 4 dogs, 1 adult, 3 pups. They've been abused badly. Can you come?" There was no hesitation. "I'm on my way." Less than an hour later, the crunch of tires announced Dr. Elise Moreno. She stepped from her mud-streaked Subaru, denim jacket pulled tight against the night air, boots worn from countless emergencies, early 40s, dark hair braided with a streak of silver. She was known in Maple Ridge as the vet, who never said no matter how late the call. Her manner was brisk but kind, her presence warm in a way that calmed both people and animals. She crouched down the moment she stepped inside, scanning the dogs with a practiced eye. "Lord," she breathed. "What happened to you guys?" Ka gave a low growl, protective, her body tense. Elise didn't flinch. She held out her hand, palm steady. The growl faded. "You're safe now, Mama," Elise whispered. She examined Ka first, her penlight cutting through the dim. Lifting fur, tracing scars, cataloging the cruelty etched across the dog's body. Her brow furrowed deeply as each mark told its story. Cuts, bruises, a jagged scar down her flank. Old pain, deliberate pain, not chance, not accident. "She's about 6 or 7 years old," Elise murmured at last, her voice quiet, heavy. "And she's been through hell. These wounds, they're not recent, but they're deliberate. Not from fighting, not from another dog. These were inflicted." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's also underfed," Elise continued, voice tightening. "But she prioritized feeding her pups. That's the only reason they're still alive." She moved on to the puppies. 3 of them, all barely 8 weeks old. The ash-gray one was the smallest, and Elise spent the most time checking his gums and heartbeat. The other 2, one with a light golden coat, Willow, and one with a black saddle marking, Scout, were stronger but still malnourished. "Severe vitamin deficiency," Elise said, shaking her head. "They've probably been surviving on scraps. If you hadn't found them today, they wouldn't have made it. Through the week. Maybe not even tomorrow." Just then a knock sounded at the door. Caleb opened it to find Mara Duval standing on his porch. Her silver hair was pinned up in a neat bun, and she held a large basket covered with a crocheted cloth. "I heard Elisa's car," Mara said simply, stepping inside. "Brosh." She set the basket down and pulled out 3 folded wool blankets and a small bag of homemade chicken broth in mason jars. Caleb blinked, slightly taken aback. "You didn't have to." "Nonsense," Mara interrupted. "I saw what you carried into that cruiser and I saw what passed through before you arrived." Caleb paused. "What do you mean?" "Old green pickup," Mara said, brow pinching. "Rusty fenders, broken tail light. Crawled by the bridge like it was casing something." Didn't look like a local. Elise and Caleb exchanged glances. Elise broke the silence. "That confirms it. These dogs weren't strays. Someone left them there intentionally." Mara looked down at Ka, who was now resting her head on Caleb's outstretched hand. "And this one," she said softly, "has more strength left than most people I know." As if in agreement, Ka lifted her head and slowly, gingerly licked Caleb's wrist. It wasn't just gratitude. It felt like recognition. Later, after Lise had administered fluids and left behind vitamin and a special blend of food, Caleb sat near the fireplace with the puppies nestled against him. The smallest one, Ash, curled up inside his hoodie again, nuzzling close to his heartbeat. Willow, the golden pup, whimpered and scratched at his pant leg. Caleb reached down and she placed both front paws on his shin, staring up with round, uncertain eyes. Then Scout, the black-marked male, did something unexpected. He gently grabbed the edge of Caleb's sock with his teeth, tugged once, then laid down at his feet. Caleb let out a small, dry laugh. "You're all going to make this real hard, aren't you?" he whispered. But even as he said it, he knew it was already too late. They had chosen him. The mist still clung to the outskirts of Maple Ridge like a second skin, as the early morning sun tried and failed to burn through the clouds. Officer Caleb. Hart stepped out of his patrol truck with a worn burlap sack folded under his arm. His boots crunched over the gravel lot of Maple Ridge Feed Supply, a modest storefront with chipped green paint and a faded wooden sign swaying in the breeze. The air smelled of hay, damp wood, and something faintly metallic like old nails and rain. Inside the store was dimly lit, cluttered with hanging coils of rope, dusty bags of feed, and rows of tools that hadn't moved in years. Behind the counter stood Earl Jennings, the owner, a man in his late 60s with a thick belly and an even thicker beard, gray and yellowed at the edges. He wore suspenders over a red flannel shirt, and his eyes narrowed with suspicion the moment Caleb walked in. "You looking for something, officer?" Earl rasped, wiping his hands on a rag already stained with oil. Caleb unfolded the burlap sack. and placed it gently on the counter. "I'm hoping you can tell me if this came from here." Earl squinted, adjusted his bifocals, and pinched the edge of the fabric. Printed faintly on the inside was a logo leaf. Inside a circle with the words, "Maple Ridge Feed Supply," faded beneath it. "Well, I'll be Earl," muttered, frowning. "That's one of ours." "All right. Cheap sack sold by the dozen. Do you remember who bought a batch recently?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice steady. "Maybe someone came in last week." Earl scratched his head, bushy brows furrowed. "Hard to say. We get regulars, ranchers mostly, but now that you mention it, there was a group of 3 boys, not locals, young, scruffy, paid in cash. Didn't say much." Caleb leaned forward. "Anything specific you remember about them?" "One of them had a tattoo on his forearm. Big letters right here." Earl gestured to his own arm, said Crowder. "That ring a bell?" It did. Caleb's pulse quickened. The Crowder name wasn't unknown to law enforcement. The family had a long, unsavory history up in the hills Brushens with the law for poaching, illegal hunting, and more disturbingly, a past accusation of running a dog-fighting ring that was never fully proven. They lived in a compound deep in the pines where cell service died, and even the most seasoned deputies didn't venture unless in pairs. Caleb thanked Earl and stepped back into the foggy morning, his mind already spinning. Back at his cabin, nestled near the treine where the woods thickened into shadow, Ka was waiting at the door. She rose as soon as she heard the truck and stood guard, her scarred frame tense, one ear cocked, the other bent low. She wasn't barking, but her body was alert, eyes scanning the road before settling on Caleb. The pups, Scout, Willow, and Ash, tumbled out from their makeshift bedding inside, still awkward on their little legs, but growing more energetic by the day. Scout, the boldest of the trio, with a black saddle marking on his back, bounded toward Caleb's boot and tried to bite his shoelace. Willow followed, more graceful and timid, brushing against his leg. Ash. The runt still lagged behind, but had begun watching Caleb with curious eyes, his head tilted as if listening to a silent thought. Caleb crouched, letting the pups crawl into his lap. "You little guys are stronger today," he murmured. They yipped in response. Ka walked over slowly, her gait still stiff, and nudged his hand with her nose before turning her head sharply toward the road. A low rumble echoed in the distance, a truck passing too fast for the narrow dirt stretch. She growled. Caleb stood, up following her line of sight. The truck was gone, just a smear of dust in the air, but Ka didn't relax. Her instincts were sharp like a retired soldier who still felt war in the bones. Caleb knew better than to ignore that. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat at his small kitchen table, the burlap sack spread before him. He kept thinking about the tattoo. Crowder. If the dogs were connected to that family, this wasn't just neglect. It was cruelty. Intentional. And if someone had the nerve to leave those animals tied on a train track in broad daylight, what else were they capable of? The pups slept curled in a fleece blanket beside the wood stove. Scout snored. Ash twitched, in a dream. Willow's nose poked out from the folds. Ka didn't sleep. She lay near the front door, eyes open, head resting on her paws, as if daring the world to try again. The wind had changed in Maple Ridge. That morning, Caleb Hart stepped out onto his porch with a mug of lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of unease. The mist clung low, blurring the edges of the pine trees beyond his backyard. The bird song had gone oddly quiet. Only the creak of the old wooden fence and the occasional yip of the puppies disturbed the hush. Then he saw it, a folded piece of paper pinned to the outer fence post with a blade that shimmered faintly in the early light. A hunting dagger, its handle wrapped in dirty black tape. Caleb's heart sank. He knew that knife wasn't left there by accident. He walked briskly toward it, hand resting on his sidearm out of instinct, eyes scanning the tree-ine. The note was hastily scrolled, almost feral in tone. "Full moon's near. Return the 4, or we return for blood." There was no signature. No hint of who had been close enough to approach his home undetected. But he didn't need names. The threat was clear, and the blade, still sticky with sap, hadn't been rusted by time. Whoever had been here was watching, waiting. Inside, Scout and Willow were tumbling over each other on a worn rug, nipping playfully, but Ka sat apart near the door. Her eyes tracked Caleb as he came back in, clutching the note. She let out a low growl, barely audible, her hackles raised before he even spoke. "Yeah," he murmured to her. "I feel it too." That night, Caleb began the work. He reinforced the window, latches, and replaced the old back door lock with a new deadbolt. Around the yard, he strung up thin wires connected to bells made from old soda cans and coins, anything that might jingle at the touch of a boot or paw. The forest around his property was dense, but he knew its paths well enough to set up a perimeter. It wasn't much, but it gave him time. And time in a fight meant survival. He didn't stop there. Each pup was given a simple command word and taught to respond to sharp hand signals. Scout, the boldest, took quickly to the game, barking and circling a thrown stick like it was an intruder. Willow was more cautious, learning best by watching her brother. Ash, the smallest, struggled to keep up, but barked the loudest, more sound than bite. But it was heartening all the same. Ka, though, needed no training. She already stood guard by the window at night, ears twitching with every gust of wind, her body taut like a drawn bow. Elise Moreno arrived the next day, her old green Subaru, crunching slowly over the gravel path. She stepped out wearing a long tan coat over scrubs, auburn hair tied in a messy bun, and eyes tired from an overnight emergency at the clinic. When Caleb showed her the note, she didn't speak for a long moment. Then she glanced toward Ka, who was sniffing her usual welcome near Elisa's boots. "I don't like this," she said finally, voice low. "Whoever left this isn't random. They're watching you." She knelt and gently patted Kaya's head, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a soft leather collar. It was deep blue with Asmol silver tag in the shape of a pine cone. The leather looked worn but cared for, stitched by hand. "I made this after her last checkup," Elise explained, "to replace the one she came in with. No animal should ever wear a reminder of pain." She removed the frayed rope still hanging loosely from Kaya's neck and slipped on the new collar. The shepherd sat, still the whole time, only blinking, when the tag jingled softly against her fur. "Good girl," Elise whispered. "You're safe now." Caleb noticed the vet's hand linger on Kaya's scarred chest a second longer than necessary. Elise, who rarely let emotions leak through her calm, clinical tone, stood with her fists clenched tight. As Elise turned to leave, Mara Duval was walking up the path, wrapped in a heavy wool shawl the color of wet stone. She was in her early 70s with sharp cheekbones, a thin mouth, and clear blue eyes that rarely missed a thing. Though most in town thought she was just a lonely widow with too many cats, Caleb had learned she was anything but fragile. "I brought you something," Mara said without preamble, holding out a small object wrapped in linen. It was a handbell, old bronze, and etched with faded flowers along the rim. Its handle was smooth from years of use. Caleb took it, puzzled. "My mother used it during storms," she explained, her voice lower now. "Said when the wind howled loud enough to scare your bones, ringing this would call back whatever courage had left you." She paused, looking toward the forest. "And maybe someone else will hear it too." Caleb nodded slowly, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mara. No thanks needed. Just don't let fear keep you silent." That night, he placed the bell by his nightstand. Outside, the moon began to swell, and Kaya, her back to the door, her ears perked, her scars shining under moonlight, refused to sleep. The moon rose like a silent sentinel over Maple Ridge, cloaking the forest in silver and shadows. Frost clung to the edges of Caleb Hart's window panes, blurring the world into dreamlike stillness. His log cabin sat quiet beneath the pines, the fire inside glowing low and warm. Butte inside Caleb's chest, the air was tight, tense, expectant. He hadn't slept much since the note. The words still rang in his head like a curse. "Full moon comes," returned the four. "Or else." It wasn't just a threat. It was a challenge, and tonight the moon was full. Ka lay beside the cabin's back door, her frame still lean, though muscle had begun to return with regular meals. Her sable coat shimmered under the low lamplight. The new blue leather collar Elise had given her wrapped gently around her neck, a soft counterpoint to the rope scars hidden beneath. Her ears twitched at every sound, every rustle of pine needles beyond the wooden fence. Scout and Willow were curled together by the wood stove, dreaming the restless dreams of puppies. Wren, always the alert one, was perched near the window. His ears, not yet upright but growing stronger, twitched at distant howls or wind-blown twigs. Caleb, now in a gray long-sleeve shirt and brown work vest, stood at the dining table checking the perimeter one last time. He'd installed tripwire chimes all around the back garden, simple brass bells strung on fishing line. Crude, maybe, but effective. He'd placed one above the back gate, another near the woodshed, and the last by the vegetable patch. And just in case, Mara's. Small bronze handbell sat on the kitchen counter, its handle polished smooth from age and use. Mara had handed it to him 2 nights ago with her usual brisk tenderness. The older woman, short and wiry, with silver hair tied in a scarf, had simply said, "When fear grips your throat, ring it. Someone will hear." The clock ticked past midnight. Caleb had just settled into the armchair when it happened. Clink, the faintest jingle from the yard. Ka was up before Caleb could even breathe. She stood tall and stiff, blocking the back door like a guardian. Her eyes locked onto the darkness beyond the window, and her tail was down, steady, not wagging, not afraid, ready. Ash sprang from the rug, barking sharply. His young voice cracked through the stillness like a firecracker. Willow followed, low, growls rattling in her chest. Scout hesitated, then yipped, pressing against Caleb's leg. Caleb flicked the outside floodlight on. Harsh yellow light flooded the backyard. Trees cast long, quivering shadows. For a second, there was nothing. Then, movement. Near the woodshed fence, a figure male, lean, maybe mid-20s, half-crouched, gripping the top of the wooden fence, hood up, face obscured, dressed in dark clothes, hands gloved. The man froze under the floodlight, then slowly dropped back to the ground. Ka snarled low, hackles bristling. She didn't move from the door. "Don't," Caleb muttered under his breath, gripping the doorknob but not turning it. He wasn't going to give chase. Not yet. Let them show their cards. 2 more shapes appeared briefly behind the first, further back in the treen. They didn't speak. They didn't move forward. Just stood watching the way predators test prey from a distance. Then, without warning, they all retreated, slipped back into the woods as fast as they had come. No weapons, no attempt to enter, just a test. Caleb stood there breathing hard, not from fear, but anger. These people weren't amateurs. They weren't drunk teenagers pulling pranks. They were watching, measuring, waiting for weakness. By the time he let the dogs out to sniff, the men were long gone. Ka circled the back fence, sniffing deeply. Her body was rigid with unease, but her tail flicked once in reassurance before she trotted back to Caleb and leaned into his leg. Later that morning, Elise came by with supplies. She'd brought more dog food, fresh antibiotics for Willow's upset, stomach, and a clipboard of notes. She stepped out of her old tan Subaru wearing a navy pika coat, black leggings, and red boots stained with barn mud. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a thick braid beneath a wool hat. Despite the hour, her eyes were sharp. "You said they didn't try to break in?" she asked as Caleb poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "No, they stayed back. Just one climbed part way, up the fence like they were watching how the dogs would react." Elisa's brow furrowed. Shek knelt to examine Ren's ears as he leaned into her, tail wagging furiously. "That's not random," she murmured. "That's conditioning in dogfighting, especially the underground rings. They test the reactions of potential fighters. They want to see who will bark, who will freeze, who will submit." Caleb stiffened. "You think this was training?" "More like reconnaissance," she said. "These dogs were probably taken from a fighting circuit or bred to join one. The way Kaya guards the door, that's not just maternal instinct. That's training." Caleb looked out the window. The frost was melting in streaks, revealing the pine needles beneath. The sky was starting to warm. "You need to talk to someone about the Crowers," he said, voice low. "There's more to this." Elise stood, brushing Ren's fur off her knees. She glanced, toward the sleeping puppies, then back at Caleb. "They're scared, Caleb, but they're not broken, I know," he said quietly. "Neither am I." That night he placed the bronze bell by the front door, just in case. The first snow of the season came gentle and slow, like powdered sugar sifted over the cabin roof. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of damp fir and cedar wood. Caleb Hart crouched by the copper tub in his small kitchen. Sleeves rolled past his elbows as he bathed Kaya, the German shepherd who had saved more lives in silence than most men with words. Steam curled around them, and the soft sound of water sloshing echoed off the pine walls. Ka was unusually still today, not from fear or pain, but from trust. Caleb rubbed the lather into her thick sable coat, his hand slowing as he reached her neck. His fingers brushed something hard, unnatural beneath her fur. He froze. Ka turned her head slightly, sensing the tension ripple through him. With gentle fingers, he parted her fur and found a tiny black disc, barely the size of a coin, nestled beneath an old scar. It was tethered to her collar, stitching by a thin piece of surgical thread. A tracker. His breath caught in his throat. "Ailey needs to see this," he murmured, drying Ka's fur in slow, deliberate strokes. Within the hour, Elise Moreno arrived at the cabin in her mud-speckled Subaru, carrying her worn leather vet kit. Her curly chestnut hair was pulled into a bun, snowflakes clinging to her wool coat as she stepped inside. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, setting her bag down. "I might have," Caleb replied, holding up the tiny device with a trembling hand. "I found this in Ka's neck. She's been tracked." Elisa's brows furrowed as she took the chip from him. She squinted at it under the cabin's low light, her breath sharp with realization. "This isn't just any tracker," she said. "There's a medical chip embedded in the housing. Let me scan it." She retrieved a small scanner from her bag and hovered it over the chip. A green light blinked twice, then beeped. The screen lit up with a code. Project DR9. Her lips parted. "This is Caleb. This is from a discontinued military program, a K9 combat training initiative. I remember hearing whispers about it when I was interning at the state vet hospital. The project was shut down 4 years ago. Ethical concerns, experimental, aggression conditioning. These dogs were never supposed to go to the public." Caleb sat back in stunned silence, his eyes slowly turning toward Ka, who now lay curled by the stove, one eye half open, watching them. "You think she was part of that?" he asked, voice low. Elise nodded slowly. "I'd bet my cents on it. Someone branded her with that project, then dumped her. Or she escaped." Caleb's jaw clenched. The puzzle was starting to fit in terrible ways. The men who left that note, they're not just dog fighters. They're trying to raise something. She's not just valuable, she's dangerous to them. Or maybe she knows something they want kept. Buried. He stood and began pacing. They didn't just come for the puppies. They came to reclaim her. A log in the stove crackled loudly as if affirming their relation. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees. Ka didn't move from her spot, but her eyes followed every motion Caleb made. She understood. He could feel it. Elise walked over and knelt beside the dog, placing a hand gently on her neck. She's still got the scarring from the embedded device. I can remove it fully now, but if we do, and they're still pinging it, they'll know we found it. Caleb finished for her. Let them. Maybe it's time we stop playing defense. Ash, the smallest of the three puppies, ambled in from the hallway, a chewed slipper dangling from his mouth. He was all ears and clumsy paws, with a streak of darker fur along his back. His tail wagged as he dropped the slipper at Caleb's feet. Your guard dog needs to work on subtlety, Caleb muttered, cracking a half smile. Elise chuckled. They're growing fast. Did you notice Scout's been guarding the porch every morning? And Willow actually barked at the reflection yesterday. Progress, Caleb said softly, watching Aska stretched and nose dashed back toward the sleeping pile of pups near the hearth. There was comfort in the little things, quiet domestic rhythms that masked the storm building just beyond the tree-ine. Elise looked up. I want to suggest something just for a few days. Let Metakea to my clinic. She'll be safe. I have reinforced kennels, and we can run a full scan for any other implants or scarring. Caleb shook his head slowly. She won't go. I tried getting her into the truck earlier this week for a checkup. She froze. Doesn't trust enclosed spaces anymore, and I won't force her. Elise sighed, understanding. Then I'll come here every day. I'll bring the scanner, tools, antibiotics, whatever she needs. Thank you, he said, his voice heavy with something deeper than gratitude. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the flames flicker in the stove. Snow tapped against the windows like fingertips. From another world, as Elise gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. There's something else. The file number on that chip. It's not random. It's part of a classified set. Someone out there still has access to that database. If they're tracking Ka, they know she's alive. And if they know she's here, then we don't have much time. Caleb finished grimly. Elise nodded and stepped into the snow. As the cabin door closed, Kaya lifted her head and let out a low, warning growl toward the dark beyond the window. It was not a growl of fear, but of memory. Caleb sat beside her and placed a steady hand on her back. We'll protect them, he whispered, all of them. Whatever it takes. The air that morning tasted of metal and pine, dampened by the fog that clung low between the evergreens. Caleb Hart stood on the porch of the cabin, thermos in hand, his gray eyes fixed westward where the trees turned thick and shadowed. Behind him, the fireplace crackled faintly, and inside the three puppies were fast asleep, their tiny chests rising and falling in rhythm near Mara's boots. But Ka wasn't inside. She was by Caleb's side, always. The 10-year-old German shepherd sat upright, ears twitching at every distant rustle. Her sable coat shimmered where the early light kissed the silver streaks along her back. The scar on her hind leg tugged slightly with each shift of her weight, but her alertness never waned. An anonymous voicemail had arrived at dawn. There's a shack out by Ash Creek. No one's used it in years, but I heard barking, screaming. Just thought someone should know Caleb didn't trust anonymous tips, but he trusted his gut. And right now, it told him to go one if possible. He turned to Elise and Mara, who were attending to the pups. I'll go check it out, he said. Just me and Ka. Elise Moreno looked up from brushing Ash's patchy fur. The veterinarian's brown hair was tied back loosely today, strands escaping around her soft features. "You sure you don't want me to come with you?" He shook his head. "If it's what I think, I need to move fast." Quiet Mara, always blunt and practical, tightened the wool blanket around Scout. "You get a bad feeling?" she asked. "I get the sense someone wants us to." He clipped Kaya's tactical harness in place. As soon as it snapped, the dog stood, body taut, eyes sharp. She was ready. Before leaving, he turned back. "Don't let anyone near the cabin while I'm gone." And then they disappeared into the trees. The trek to Ash Creek wasn't easy. The trail wound through fallen logs and deuce-lick moss, the kind of path only hunters or old hermits used. But Ka was purposeful. She led them through without hesitation, nose low, tail rigid. After nearly an hour, the shack came into view. A skeletal structure, gray wood eaten by years of weather. The roof slouched to one side, windows boarded with mismatched planks. The only sign of life was a broken lantern swaying in the cold breeze. But Kaya growled the moment she stepped within 20 feet of it. "Easy," Caleb whispered. She didn't listen. Instead, she lunged toward the side of the cabin and began clawing at the soft ground near the wall. Caleb crouched and began digging with his hands. Just beneath the surface was a hollow pit boarded up crudely. Inside, he found a pile of torn burlap sacks like the ones that had covered Ka's eyes, a rusted chain and a cracked security camera. Lens, shattered. But the red light still blinked faintly. He didn't have time to process it. A branch snapped behind them. He turned and two figures emerged from the tree-line. One was tall, wiry, wearing a black rain jacket with the hood low. The other, broader, face obscured by a ski mask, hands gloved. Neither spoke, but they moved fast. The tall one lunged toward Caleb, pulling a knife from his belt. The broad one ran at Ka, swinging a heavy pipe. Caleb rolled backward, barely avoiding the blade. He kicked the attacker's knee, then slammed his shoulder into the man's chest. The impact sent them both to the ground. Fists flew. Caleb grabbed the man's wrist and twisted the knife free, but not before catching a gash across his own arm. Meanwhile, Ka met the second man head-on. The pipe swung down. She ducked, twisted, and clamped her jaws onto his forearm. He screamed, dropping the weapon. She drove her weight into him, knocking him off balance. Blood stained his sleeve as he staggered back. The taller man tried to grab his partner, but Caleb tackled him again, this time slamming his fist into the man's face. There was a crunch, nose or jaw, he couldn't tell. Ka circled, barking violently, her tail low, teeth bared. The two men finally scrambled up, breathing hard, bleeding, and fled into the woods. Caleb lifted his phone, filming their retreating backs. Before disappearing completely, the broader one turned and snarled. She was ours. She still is. Then they were gone. Caleb stood for a moment, heart hammering. Blood dripped from his forearm onto the leaves below. Ka returned to his side, panting, her muzzle streaked with red, but not her own. He crouched and held her face gently. "You all right, girl?" She let out a quiet huff and nudged his chin. They didn't linger. Caleb grabbed the camera, the chain, and the burlap sacks, and they headed back toward the cabin with urgency in every step. When they arrived, Elise rushed to the porch. "You're bleeding." "It's shallow," Caleb muttered. "Just need to clean it." Inside, Mara was standing with a hammer in one hand and Ash tucked under the other arm like a loaf of bread. "Someone came?" she asked. He nodded. "Two men tried to take her back." Elise palled. "You mean Ka? I mean, they knew her, they wanted her, but they didn't expect a fight." Mara placed Ash back into the crate with his siblings. "Did you get their faces?" "No, but I got their threads and their blood. Kaya was already by the door, lying. Watchfully, eyes never blinking. "They'll come back," Caleb said, "but next time we'll be ready." The morning sun filtered softly through the pines, casting dappled golden patterns across Caleb's cabin porch. A gentle breeze rustled the wind chimes above, their music mixing with the occasional excited bark from the puppies in the yard. The storm had passed, not just the literal one, but the one that had haunted Caleb's home and Kay's past for weeks. Now, resolution began to bloom, where fear once lingered. With the footage Caleb had captured from the hidden forest shack, complete with images of broken chains, rusted restraints, and the fierce confrontation with the two masked assailant, the case reached new heights, one of the attackers limping away. With a bloodied arm from Ka's bite, had left a partial fingerprint on the shack's broken window. The other had dropped a burner phone, which Elisa later found in a bush behind the cabin. That phone contained coordinates and encrypted messages, all of which Caleb turned over to Agent Javier Morales, a tall, no-nonsense man in his early 30s-50s with a clipped mustache and a rumpled federal windbreaker who had just arrived from the FBI's animal trafficking task force. Agent Morales, after reviewing the evidence, immediately launched a multi-state investigation. "This isn't just a backyard operation," he told Caleb. "We're talking a full-blown network illegal canine training, dogfighting, experimental conditioning. Kaya may be the key witness in a case we've been trying to crack for years." While the legal wheels began turning, the emotional healing in Pinewood unfolded in quieter, more tender ways. The town council, urged by Elise and several volunteers, organized an adoption day in front of the town library. Posters featured Scout, Willow, and Ashnow, plump with health, their fur shiny and eyes alert, each with their own little sign written in chalk. "Looking for a forever home." Scout, the boldest and most agile of the trio, drew attention from Officer Landon Rhodes, a young deputy with tousled blonde hair and a playful grin, who had always dreamed of training a K9 partner. After a short demonstration, Scout retrieving a ball, responding to simple commands, and even giving Landon a paw on request, the bond was instant. Landon crouched beside him and whispered, "You're going to be my partner, little guy. Let's catch bad guys together." Caleb nodded with quiet approval. Willow, ever the gentle and sensitive one, sat a little distance away, shyly observing the crowd. A young girl with a cochlear implant approached her, led by her mother. Her name was Lily, about 7 years old, with dark curls and big brown eyes full of wonder. When Lily knelt and placed her hand on Willow's head, something passed between them, an unspoken thread of comfort and understanding. Lily didn't speak, but she smiled, and Willow leaned into her. The match was perfect. Ash, rambunctious as ever, drew a group of rowdy children, but it was a pair of identical twins, Milo and Mason, both wearing overalls and cowboy boots, who won him over. Their parents owned a small homestead just outside town. "We've got fields. Chickens and more mud than sense," their father chuckled. "He'll have his paws full." Meanwhile, Ka remained leaning on the front porch of the cabin, head lifted, eyes calmly tracking each of her pups as they were led away. She didn't whimper. She didn't bark. She just watched. And when Ash gave one last playful yap before leaping into the pickup truck with the twins, Kaya lowered her head to her paws and exhaled deeply, as if releasing the last threads of tension she had carried. Caleb stepped onto the porch and knelt beside her. He gently scratched behind her ear just the way she liked and whispered, "You don't have to growl anymore, girl. The bad ones are gone. This place, it's safe now." That evening, as twilight draped, the trees in soft indigo hues, Caleb built a fire in the pit outside. He sat in his usual spot, wrapped in a worn blanket, a chipped mug of tea in hand. Ka lay close, her breathing steady and soft. On the small table beside him was a letter, creased at the corners, the handwriting delicate and familiar. It was from his younger sister, Hannah, who had moved across the country years ago after a falling out that neither of them had truly mended. He opened it slowly. Inside, her words were hesitant but warm. She had heard what happened in Pinewood through mutual friends, and after watching the news story about the dog-fighting ring being busted, she wrote, "I saw the photo of you and Kay. You look tired but proud. I think maybe it's time we talk again. Come home for Christmas. I'd love for the kids to meet you." And Ka, too. The edges of Caleb's mouth curled into a rare smile. He folded the letter gently, slid it into his jacket pocket, and looked up at the stars just beginning to flicker above the tree-line. "I'm coming home, Hannah," he murmured. "But this time, I won't be coming alone." Kay raised her head as if sensing his words and nudged his leg softly. She would always carry scars just like him. But the cabin wasn't just shelter anymore. It was healing ground, a final stop on a road long traveled, and a place where every soul who entered, whether on 2 legs or 4, could finally rest. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come as loud explosions or flashing lights. They come in the form of quiet loyalty, the gentle eyes of a rescued dog, or the warmth of a second chance. Ka had every reason to give up on humanity. She had been abused, abandoned, and broken. But by the grace of God, she found her way to Caleb, a man just as scarred, just as lost. Together they created a home not just for themselves, but for others who needed one too. This story reminds us that healing is possible, that redemption is real, and that God often sends his angels on 4 legs and with wagging tails. If you believe that love can heal, if you believe that every living being deserves a second chance, if you believe that God still works miracles through the quiet acts of kindness we offer each other, then type Amen in the comments and be part of this message of hope. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. Comment below your thoughts or a time when God brought healing into your life. Subscribe to our channel for more heart-touching stories of courage, loyalty, and grace. May God bless you, your home, and all the creatures who walk beside you. Amen.